So here I just want to give you a little bit of info on spline control. Of course, we saw ourselves use it in the brows in the simple face, and we'll use it more again in some slightly different ways in the advanced face. Firstly, if you don't already have some familiarity with it, go over to the YouTube where of course you can see this video on spline control, which tells you an awful lot about it. Splines can be really useful in faces due to the ability to get things moving along curved paths. But due to some of their peculiarities, they do need just a little bit of care. Otherwise, you can swiftly wind up with certain problems. So first of all, here I have a item, in this case a camera. It's attached to a spline, and it's just sat here at the base of the spline. But of course, you have this funny thing where the Z channel of the item that is receiving spline control, the keyframed value of that determines how far along from the base of the spline, that is the first spline item, the attached item actually is. But Lightwave spits back out the actual coordinates for that item's parent space. So you can see here it's actually at 0. If I enter 0, that's where it is, but as soon as Lightwave updates the motions, then it jumps to -5 meters on Z, because this is just a world child and that's its position. Meaning that if you key things, suddenly it jumps backwards and you've got to bring it back to here again, and it all starts to seem kind of unusual. This gives you problems because if you set something to a certain position on the spline, and then of course you keyframe the item just normally, it jumps out again, and you can see in this case it's also flipped, and you keep winding up having to push things back. That of course is why in the simple face we use the expressions to push the brow spline points up the forehead spline rails, because of course expressions act before motion control and IK, then whatever you push into expressions gets applied more properly. That's why you can do something like taking a based controller here, so it's just sat at 0, 0, 0 relative to its parent, and of course take an expression that references that and apply it to your spline constrained item, and as a result you can keyframe this controller with confidence, and no matter what happens to it, your spline controlled item won't be affected. And because that's being driven by an expression, if this does get keyframed, it's not affected either. This technique has usefulness in a couple of places when dealing with items that are locked onto splines. First of all, if we want to have something on a spline but we want to have a controller for it, then we see this method here. But what we'll often do in splines is want to distribute a number of nulls down it, just as we did with the brow, have them, fit a spline. Often you'll need something to actually base at the base of the spline to always be at 0. And whilst of course you can just set its initial keyframe at 0 and leave it, and it seems good, if that item receives a keyframe, or if you wind up using key all items, then it will get jumped out of place. Similarly, we can turn to expressions again. So of course there I'm just getting a value from the Z position of that control item, but I could just put in here 0. And so now no matter what happens, this camera is always stuck at the beginning of that spline. It won't move no matter how it's keyed, accidentally selected and moved, nothing. Another useful thing that we can do in spline control is to exploit how it handles hierarchies of items. So here I've got the light that's just a child of the camera, and you can see that its position of course is 0, 0, 0. When you have an item that is a child of something on the spline, and this item itself also gets that same spline as its control, then its Z position from its parent is its distance not along the spline, but along the spline from its parent's position. So let's just bring up that expression again, okay, and let's just stick in 2. So now the camera is 2 meters along the spline. We see, of course, that our light here, being its child, is still at 0 meters, but you can pull it away quite confidently and keyframing it after it's been shoved off somewhere. Give it a keyframe. You see, it doesn't cause its position to jump. So this is another way that you can get nice, steady control of things that are stuck on splines, is to instead have a base item which has a forced position on the spline, which might be some way along it or might commonly be 0, and then a free moving item which is a child of it. The other thing with hierarchies is what we have when we have, a chain of items like this. They are on the spline, and of course we use the fit to spline like this. Now when they are all at 0, as they are here, they've got no distance from their parent, they'll just sit on top of one another. But when we give these children down some distance, let's just go for 10 millimeters, then you see that they space themselves out on the spline like that. And of course, as the first item in the chain is moved, they will rack up and down, filling out the space like that. So again, we can use this just like the fractional constraints to give us something that will, spread out down the length of a spline and give us nice even spacing. Notice that the trick to the even spacing is for each item to be keyed the same amount, the same distance down from its parent. It doesn't matter if I stick in 3 meters here instead of 10 mil. You can see that the spacing is the same. The point is each child is an equal distance from its parent, and so you get this equal spacing down the chain like this. If one item were perhaps a different amount of distance from its parent, then you would get this, offset position at that one item, thusly. Again, as you can see, these things have output coordinates coming as their distance from their parents, and so if we again have something set up like this, but those items get keyed, perhaps from keying all items, then oh look, they all rejig their positions again. Once more, there is a way that we can easily force this, so we can select them all, get all of their Z channels, and give them a forced value expression. Perhaps with a, control-based expression on the first item, and what we see that gives us is a nice, fixed, steady, simple control like this, and no amount of keyframing of all items will break any of this. As such, when setting up rigs that are going to use, spline pieces like this, it is advisable to set up a force value expression on the chain of items that are running down, and some sort of control expression for the first item, even if that control is a forced value itself. The other thing to remember is the treatment of bones and how they work on a spline, how differently they work on a spline. As you see here, I'm once again just using the control to drive the first bone in the chain here. But what you see, of course, is their rotation, and the way that they rotate is so that the tip of each bone is always on the spline. So the base is, of course, on the spline, but so is the tip. And notice that this continues even if, the bones are spaced apart from their parents a distance greater than their rest length. It's always base to tip alignment like this, which can cause some strange, turns going on. For instance, if we look at this bone here, as you see, it approaches this bend in the spline. It is actually turning before it reaches the turn, because of course its tip is aligning to a future position on the spline. Sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. And of course, if you're used to using nulls or other things on a spline, then you're used to them turning when they hit the turn, not beforehand. So this is an unusual behaviour that can be problematic in some setups. This means that the better option is often that which we did in the basic face rig, to set up nulls that go along the spline, and for those nulls then to be items which bones are constrained to. The other reason being, if you just try to take raw bones, stick them on a spline and, there you go, when you select them and rest them, that also changes their base rest positions, and you can see they jump ever so slightly as well. So you set yourself up a nice, run of bones on a spline, thinking this is a great control for this bit of the face, and you rest the bones in and suddenly they all jump out of position. And the last and final thing to remember and be aware of when dealing with splines that has particular importance in face rigs is what happens when splines are small. Generally, this spline control, it's sort of meant to act more like a road or a path over larger areas. You can see here, each grid is 1 meter, so this is, quite a few meters long. But you can see that when these spline points come close together, you get this buckling of the spline, which you don't see normally in spline display, but when you're using the ribbon display, then it becomes, quite obvious here. You can see the spline beginning to misbehave. The problem with this is, as you see, it can cause these little lumps and bumps to occur as things move over that area. See, that's some snap and jump of the bones there as they pass over. It can have the same effect on rotation because, of course, the spline can control twisting for the bank channel. Things can tend to flip back and forth, which, of course, is not what we want. This isn't simply because I'm bringing two control points together on what is otherwise a long spline. I mean, if we, shrink the whole thing down, so it's, what is that, like half a meter long? Quite short there. But we can see how it's all twisted around and a bit mangled looking nonetheless. And this again can give you some little problems in how the spline gives rotation to items which are on it. The reason this is a problem for us in faces, of course, is because most of the time we will want to be building our face models at realistic size. Heads aren't particularly big. Things like eyebrows, they're only 30, 40, 50 millimeters long, the same in lips and so on. If we put splines in these areas, they are going to be tiny little short splines. So there we go. There's the, specific little face-specific issues that we get with splines, some of the tricks that we can use to manage them. You'll see us employ these tricks as we move into the advanced rig, and the ways to get round them by using nulls that bones then constrain to. It does mean more work of adding nulls. It does mean these, bigger scene editors of all these extra nulls for the spline, then for the tracks that are on the spline, then of course the bones constrain to them. But for making sure that what you get out is stable, solid, dependable, predictable and controllable, it's very much worth the work. And indeed, so is using the splines at all rather than a different method for the lovely shaping and control that they do give to us.